Your meeting.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining. I'm just going to give people a couple more minutes to kind of get settled, get admitted into the room, and then we'll get started. And I apologize if you can hear my daughter in the background. She says she'd really like to be a part of this meeting, but she's only one, so it's not a great meeting for her. So.
Camera?
No, because I don't let myself be seen.
Huh?
I had the video off. Yeah.
I should leave you alone.
There's my name. Well, not until I start.
All right, so it's 1:02. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. I can see that people are kind of mostly admitted if they're coming in. I'll keep an eye on that.
Hi, how are you?
Us.
What in the world happened?
It's called Southwest Airlines.
But yeah, we're going to go ahead and get started. So the way that this is going to run today is that I'm going to just give a brief overview of our animal welfare grant program. I'll be sharing my screen and just showing you our website. We'll walk through the basics of what the program is, kind of what it means to have funding required, like funding priorities, some different elements of the program. We'll walk through that, and then we're just going to open the floor for questions and answers. So any questions that you have, feel free to hop on at that point. This is pretty casual. So same thing, I'm going to be sharing my screen. If you have a question along the way, don't hesitate to take yourself off mute, interrupt me. By all means, very happy to have that happen. But this is going to be casual, informational, and yeah, just let me know if anything comes up along the way. And we're going to go ahead and get started. So I'm going to share my screen of our website. Let's see here. I'll share. This one looks like we're sharing my Zoom meeting, but here we go. All right. So to learn more about any of our grant cycles, oh, I also forgot to introduce myself. And actually I need to rename myself as well, because I realized I am logged in as a different member of our team. But my name is Angelica Hull, and I'm the Grants Manager at the Community Foundation of Sarasota County. This means that I run a lot of our competitive grant cycles. So when you come onto our website and you look at grant opportunities, most of those fall under me. So you'll come under nonprofits and then grant opportunities. On this page, you can scroll down and you can see all of our opportunities that we have available for our fiscal year, which runs July 1 through June 30th. We put them all up at the beginning of the fiscal year so that you can get a feel for the different opportunities we have throughout the year, and you can plan accordingly. So when we scroll down here, you see all of these grant programs. If you have questions about any of them, don't hesitate to reach out to me. But the one we are focusing on today specifically is animal welfare grants. So when you see this here, you can click on this page and it will take you into a more detailed page about the animal welfare grants themselves. The first thing that you see on this page is that it's to support organizations that serve animals and promote their humane care in Sarasota, Manatee, Charlotte, and DeSoto counties. The reason for those counties is that's our 4-county service area. So we are a community foundation. Our work is really focused locally. And so this is what we define as the area that we serve. If we keep scrolling down this page, you can see that animal welfare grants are designed to be between $10,000 and $50,000. One of the reasons for that is that, we have smaller rolling grant cycles. We have a community impact cycle and a capacity building cycle that are reviewed monthly. And those opportunities are open for projects that are less than $10,000 or up to $10,000. So we're really hoping in the animal welfare cycle that we're seeing some bigger projects, some things that will have a large impact on your organization. That's why we have those guidelines here for the amount of funding that you can request. Once again, it's to support animals in our service area, so in that 4-county area. And it's a competitive grant cycle, which just basically means that there's a time period where you apply, And then we'll read through your application and look through it with everybody else's application that comes in. We have funding priorities for each of our grant programs. Now, funding priorities are not designed to say that if your project doesn't fit in these priorities that you shouldn't apply. They're here primarily to help you because what we do on our end is we have a lot of different funds that are working in the background. And those funds can have a lot of different purposes. You know, they can be as broad as unrestricted funding for whatever projects you'd like to issue this fund for, or they can be very specific. They can be, you know, for refrigerator replacement for human services organizations. They can be very, very specific. And so when we look at funding priorities in general, they're there to help you learn where we have the most opportunity for funding. So when we look here and we see that there is funding for emergency veterinary treatment, for urgent cases or extraordinary medical needs, with a focus on this type of care for domestic animals. So what that's telling you is that we probably have funds that are tied to medical care and that are tied to domestic animals. It doesn't mean that if you don't serve domestic animals, you can't apply to this program. That's a change we made this year. Previously, this program was only open to domestic animals. This year, we have a couple extra funds that are not restricted to only domestic animals, but some of our larger funds are. So that's where we have this kind of focus on medical care for domestic animals. And then we also have a focus on supporting volunteer program development, including but not limited to the growth of foster programs and supplies to support those programs. That was a big need that we saw from the animal welfare community when COVID hit. Was a big need for these kind of supports and infrastructure for volunteer programs. So we're trying to put a focus there to help kind of meet those needs that we saw voiced. Once again, if your ask doesn't fall into these categories, it doesn't mean that it doesn't qualify. It just means that these categories are areas where we have funding and we've dedicated support. But go ahead and submit it if it's something different. We're happy to take a look at it. When we look at eligibility for this grant cycle, we're looking at, you know, what we just talked about, that individual requests would fall between $10,000 and $50,000. We may choose to fund your application partially. So you might apply for $50,000 and we might choose to fund that at a lower amount. If that's the case, we do have a question on the application itself that says, do you want to be considered for partial funding? So if you need, you know, $15,000, $20,000 to make this program happen, and if you don't get $20,000, this program's not going to happen, please go ahead and check no there. You know, it's not a judgment call. There's nothing that, you know, we're not ruling anybody out for that reason. We just want to make sure that we're not putting you in a position of, you know, if you're applying for an amount and you need exactly that amount to do your project, we just want to know that. So that question is on our application. And then you also have obviously the option to opt in to partial funding, up to you. And then we have 3 other points for being eligible for our grant programs. These are consistent across all of our grant cycles. You see them also on the main page for our grants, but we'll go over them here. They apply for all of our grant cycles across the board. The first thing is that you need to be a 501c3 public charity. So there are different types of 501c3s. This surprises people sometimes, but there are private foundations, private operating foundations. If we try to make a grant to those, there are special requirements on us to be able to fund that type of organization. So we ask that if you're coming in through one of these open cycles, that you are a 501c3 public charity. We also ask that you have a program of impact in our service area, which we've talked about. You know, we're a community foundation, we're serving a local area. And then finally, and maybe most importantly, we need your giving partner profile to be up to date. So this is something, we have a question in the application to kind of jog your memory on this too. One of the first questions you're going to see is, it says, please go to the giving partner, check on your profile, see if it says that it's approved / current, and, you know, update your status here. If you need help, we have some great articles that are also linked in the application that kind of can help you make those updates. But we do check your giving partner profile. We do make sure that it is approved or current when the application closes. So go ahead and look into that if you're planning to apply. Try to get that up to date ahead of time. And if you have any questions about how to do that, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We can help make that happen. So finally, once you've kind of seen the types of things that we want to fund, you can see that you're eligible, you've checked your giving partner profile, you are ready to apply. So when you apply, basically, you'll come in and you'll fill out an application on our digital grants platform. The application is open now. It opened on the 5th of October. It'll close on December 17th. The main reason for that is that we didn't want anybody to have to work on these over the holidays. So we're closing them before the holidays happen. Then we're going to start our review process after the holidays. So if you notice that it's kind of a long time until you're notified, that's because we are also obviously in and out of the office. And so we'll be starting the review process on the other side of the holidays. When we say review process, what we mean by that is that the applications are sent to a committee for review. Our committee is staff members, board members, and then local people who are animal welfare experts. That's a really big piece for us. We want community members who work in these sectors, especially for kind of specific grant cycles like these. We want people who know the field. You know, I might be an expert grant maker, but I might not know the ins and outs of what it means to work in animal welfare. So it's extraordinarily helpful to have them on the committee. Don't worry, they're not the heads of nonprofits. If they have a conflict of interest, they're sitting out those rounds. So do not think that we are giving special favors to anyone who's on our committee. It's not like that. We're working primarily with animal welfare groups that are not nonprofits. And then if there is anyone from a nonprofit community, they fill out a form in advance and let us know conflict of interest. And we do respect that very heavily. And so basically, yeah, once you finish completing your application, it'll go out to be reviewed by our committee. Our committee reviews it on their own. Every committee member reviews and scores all the applications on their own. And then we come together for a long conversational committee meeting. And that's really where decisions get made. So we come together, we sit around a table or sit around a Zoom room, and we talk through each application, kind of our questions, our comments, our thoughts, where we think it might fall, and we come to decisions. As we go through the applications, we look at them from highest scoring applications to lowest scoring applications. And along the way, at some point, you know, we'll distribute funding, we'll make decisions, and at some point we run out of funding. And that's kind of where that conversation concludes. And that's where we start notifying groups of their decisions. So that's generally how the process works. When you're ready to apply, you can click this Apply Now button. That'll take you to our digital platform and get you started on the application. If you want to work on the application outside of the platform, I know some people are more comfortable doing things in Word where you can save it and edit it and share it within your team. You can download a PDF of the application right here so that you can kind of prepare that, share that, and get your answers ready. And then when you're ready to put them into the digital platform, you can go ahead and do that this way. And then finally, there's some links here about grant reporting. So if you do receive a grant, you can read about next steps right here on this page. And if you're interested in other grants that have been received by other organizations locally, you can scroll down here to the Stories of Impact section. And you can see some other groups that have been funded through this program in the past and some of the projects that they've been working on. So with that, I am going to stop sharing and I am going to open up the floor for questions. Feel free to take yourself off mute. If you're uncomfortable with that, feel free to pop them in the chat. And I am here to help.
Angelica, it's Ed Sikora. How are you?
Hi, I'm doing well. How are you, Ed?
Great, great. Would you kind of go in a little more into the volunteer program development? I guess I don't understand what that might be and how might that work?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess one of the reasons that we put that on there is we saw from some surveys that we did last year that groups really needed homes outside of shelters for their pets. So whether that was medical recovery or, you know, kittens and puppies who weren't ready to be adopted yet, we saw a lot of need for that. We didn't see that many applications for it last year. but we did see a few. We saw some that were for volunteer training. So working with active volunteers to give them more in-depth knowledge about the work that they were doing. We saw a couple for that. We saw some also to kind of start up volunteer programs, do recruitment, do training, get those programs up and running. That can also include things like a volunteer management software if needed, things that can help you better manage your program internally.
And could it go for, I guess, some for practical purposes, advertising and those kind of things? Trying to, I think every one of our groups here we could use more volunteers. I don't think there's any question all of us could use that.
Yeah, absolutely. It can definitely go towards those recruitment costs. I think the main thing that we would just want to see is kind of making sure that you were measuring the turnaround of that. So if you're going to put the funding towards advertising, I think it would be good to have a question on your intake form for volunteers of how did you learn about us?
Right.
Just so that you can make sure you're getting the biggest bang for your buck. You know, if you're casting a wide net with your advertising, let's figure out where it's hitting home and where you're reaching that population that you want to reach.
Okay, terrific.
Angelica, Teresa from Venice Cat Coalition. Hi.
Hi.
I guess one thing I wonder, we've been lucky and gotten this grant before, so we have a little experience with the funds and how to stretch it and things like that. I'm sure everyone knows that with the pandemic, veterinary costs and access are way up, harder to get vets to help, and pharmaceuticals cost more than they used to. So I'm wondering if you could just talk a little bit about how you score or evaluate the proposals with how many animals you're going to help per thousand or per $5,000 versus, you know, some of these medical emergencies can cost $5,000 for one. So how far is the grant going to go? And so how do you judge what really the donors want to achieve?
That's a great question. And it's one we get somewhat frequently throughout grant programs because, you know, there's different types of programs, exactly like you said. There are ones that could have a broad touch to 5,000 animals. It might be a quick vaccination to 5,000 animals, and that's one type of impact. Or it might be a $2,000 cost for one animal, and that's a different type of impact. You know, some of those are life-saving measures versus preventative care. So it's not an exact scale. And I know that it's not a concrete answer, but it's, you know, each individual member of our committee will read through each application and they will determine and score based off of what they consider to be the impact of that program. So we don't judge based off of numbers. We're not saying, you know, this one's serving 750 and this one's serving 10. Because there's that flexibility in how impactful and kind of the depth of the impact of those different programs. So it really, like I said, comes down to that conversation that we have as a committee, more so than a scoring rubric with that type of question on impact and numbers. Because we want to consider each program individually. We know that everybody has different needs. And we also know that some organizations, you know, might be able to provide vaccinations for 750, but then they don't have any type of funding that can support those more in-depth costs. So we really try to look at it holistically and across the board as to, you know, what is this whole program doing? Is it a depth impact or a kind of breadth impact? And how does that work? Okay. So there's not a concrete preference for one over the other.
Are you trying to do any kind of even distribution of funds across South County, North County, the various counties involved, or is it just whoever's best proposal, no matter where they are?
That gets complicated. So as I said, there's a lot of different funds that we pull from to make these choices. Some of those funds are county specific. So we can't necessarily say that we'll do an even distribution across the board. What we will try to do is the most even and the most fair choices that we can make with the resources that we have. So when we have that conversation as a committee, we do look at location, we look at our funds, we look at different types of impact, we look at different types of programs, and we try to make fair decisions across the board, but it's complicated. You know, it's not a perfect system where we can say that that's going to happen 100% every time.
Okay. And finally, can you define domestic animal? What does that mean to you? Dogs and cats and birds, or is it more than that?
So, okay, we've spent a lot of time looking into this. Basically, I think the way that we came to the conclusion last year is we actually shared a lot of definitions within our committee just to kind of get a feel for it. This year it's nice because once again, we have some other funding that we didn't have in years past that doesn't need to be restricted to domestic animals. But most of the time what I found for a definition of domestic animals is it's animals that have shown some type of evolutionary change based off of an ability to work with humans. So things like dogs, cats, farm animals would count in that category as well. Things that are, you know, working closely and interacting in a relationship with humans. But this year that is a lot less restrictive than it has been in years past because we do have those other funds as well.
So that would include wildlife.
Yes, so this year this application is open to wildlife. So I see there's a question in the chat about what changes are on the application from previous years. That's one of the biggest ones, is that this year wildlife is eligible, where in previous years it has not been. And that is because we have access to some funds that aren't restricted to domestic animals. In previous years, we haven't had access to those funds.
Hey,
Angelica?
this is Callie from Peace River Wildlife Center. Working
Was
with
that an
wildlife,
elephant?
not domestic animals. Are there funds available for things that might be considered, say, operating expenses, such as food costs, medications, building new caging, repairing current caging, that sort of thing? Or are they
There
specific?
can be. I think that it's there. Let me rephrase that. Yes, there can be, absolutely. I think that it's helpful for us if we're going to go towards operating costs to know, you know, is this something that you could have budgeted for? Is it something that, you know, is a new need? Is it something that has come up suddenly? Is it something that we're working towards over time? Like, how does it fit into your overall picture? So let's say you're coming to us and you say, I want to expand my service to serve 200 extra animals. As part of that, I need to build cages. I might need to fund, you know, 10% of this staff member's time to do X, Y, and Z. That type of operations, absolutely, we can kind of work towards that. We just want to see how it's fitting into your overall picture.
Well, for example, we spend $100,000 a year in food alone, and we're always trying to buffer that cost. We don't always get the donations of food products that we would like to get, you know, and that's an ongoing thing. It's every day, all the animals that we service, in addition to all the new ones that we take in. So wasn't sure if that was, because it's not something new. It is something we budget for, but we're always trying to, again, you know, compensate and not have to take that out of, you know, our operating costs and you know, and try to reduce the cost with grants and donations.
Mm-hmm. I would say, you know, with just like the limitations that I know on our funds, I don't know if that would be the strongest fit for this grant cycle, but I think you could include it as part of a budget. I think if it was part of a larger project or something, I think it could be a piece of it. Just from what I've seen from the committee for the past few years, I haven't seen a strong preference for projects like that. It doesn't mean that the committee is the same or the committee would make the same decisions this time around.
Angelica, Ed Secor again. Just going back to that question a minute ago about emergency vet care and all of that. I just to that point, you know, you just never know. You know, I think we get some general help, but you know, sometimes it can be quite expensive. And you know, again, what was the answer on that in terms of, is that appealing to this grant cycle in terms of setting up reserves for those kinds of things?
Yes, absolutely. So that is one of the priorities for this cycle, is emergency medical care. And one of the reasons for that too, and just to kind of get into the nitty gritty there, is that, you know, we know that veterinary costs are extremely expensive. We know that everybody has them across the board, just kind of day-to-day veterinary costs. We know that that's one of the highest pieces of operating for a lot of these organizations. We also know that we don't have unlimited funding there. And so it's really hard for us if we say general veterinary care, we're going to see every organization that applies apply for $50,000 for general veterinary care. And we don't have that type of funding. You know, we're working with what we have access to and where we're able to make a bigger impact. So that's where we've given it kind of that emergency designation, because we can help people set up those funds for those costs that are going above and beyond those things that, you know, where we might be able to help you make a choice that you weren't able to make otherwise. So that's where that emergency piece comes in, because we can know that at least, you know, exactly, if you want to set up a fund to help as those things come in, we don't expect you to know that, you know, you're going to have a $5,000 cost coming in next year, but we will, you know, we're happy to help support that if we can.
Right. You know, for an example, you know, we've had situations where, you know, we've received a call from Fish and Wildlife or from even the police department with a group of animals that need to be rescued, and they're in bad shape, and, you know, end up having to spend a significant amount of cost associated with the medical care to get them healthy. And of course, in that instance, I can think of one story where there were 11 animals that had to be taken in and sent for emergency veterinary care, and it was a significant amount of money. So I guess the question, Angelica, is how would you quantify something like that? Would we just look back at maybe the previous year or years worth of experiences and try to quantify it for you?
Yeah, so we've funded a couple of things like that in the past where they've come in through the cycle, and it's someone who wants to set up a fund that can help meet those expenses as they come in. And so basically, yeah, it would be backtracking the last couple of years, seeing what that looks like on average for your organization, applying for part or all of that cost. And just saying, you know, over the past 2 years, we've seen that, you know, these above and beyond medical costs add up to X amount of dollars. We'd like to start a fund to support these above and beyond medical costs. If we do that, here's our application for where it would go and kind of the amount that we need.
Right. And then in the grant reporting, obviously you just provide an audit of that we ended up using, you know, X of the, you know, $5,000 that we requested or something in the course of this year. And then I'm assuming you would want it to just roll or stay in reserves going forward in the organization until it's used for that purpose.
So ideally, we would hope, since these grants have a kind of a 1-year shelf life, we're looking for a report within a year. So ideally, we'd say we'd like for you to apply for the amount that you think you could use in a year.
Okay.
A big reason for that on our end is that the funds that we're working with are mostly endowed funds, which means that we can pull funds out of them once a year. So we can come back and have this cycle annually. You know, we can distribute funds once a year. And so for us, that's a nice way to organize kind of the expenditure of funds too, so that if you come back next year, we can help re-meet you with those funds that we have access to again.
Okay. Well, I have a real need for a jet ski this year.
If only we had jet ski funds, that would be the real winner for us.
I use them to rescue animals. I'm trying. So thank you, Angelica.
No, of course.
So, Angelica, unless anybody else wants to jump in with a question, as I said, we've gotten the grant before and we really appreciate it. And please thank those donors, because boy, this is an unusual grant for our county, and I'm sure more people are hearing about it. I've never had any opportunity to like get to know the donors behind the money. It's always coming through the staff. You guys do a pretty good job, but I'm wondering if you can speak on behalf of the donors. And I've also noticed that you have an amount that we're told is going to be awarded, but then you have gone over the amount. And I think you've probably funded more, I'm going to guess, of the applicants than you initially maybe thought you were going to. So I'm looking for some comments on how the donors see this and going into the 3rd year. Are they ecstatic? Are they lukewarm? Is this going to continue to happen? And are there any new donors that are saying, oh, wow, let's also join and help, because there's so many, the need is so much greater than the resources available for this across the board?
Yeah, absolutely. I can speak to all of those. So, first off, when we talk about the donors and we talk about who specifically is supporting this program, right now, most of the donors who are supporting the program, or most of the funds that we're using to support this program, are legacy funds, which means that they were funds that maybe a donor set up during their lifetime and controlled during their lifetime, but after they passed away, they left it to the community foundation to steward those funds. So that's why you mostly see staff on this grant cycle, is because most of those funds were set up to be stewarded by the community foundation after a donor's passed away. So for us right now, we're working with funds that have a purpose that was set up in advance. And so our job is to make sure that those funds go out to projects that fall within that purpose. So when you see a lot of our grant cycles that are run exclusively through us, most of the time, those are funds that we now have discretion over, and we're making sure that we are living out that donor's legacy and making sure that those funds are going where they intended. Are new donors getting interested in this program and this cycle? Absolutely. We are absolutely seeing that donors are coming on board. They are writing funds and kind of agreeing to what types of funds they'd like to set up, both for now and for the future. And one of the things that's really great about cycles like this is that they help us as a community foundation learn about your needs. So then when donors come to us and say, hey, I want to help animals, we can say, oh, well, interestingly enough, we have 3 years now of applications and needs that we can see from this sector that we can share with you so that you can see what those needs look like. So that as you set up your funds for either use now or use in the future, you can decide how specific you want that fund to be used. You know, does it need to go to dogs and cats? Can it go to other animals? Does it need to go to this specific type of need within that sector? Could it be a little bit broader? And so we're able to have those conversations. And I think that first off, thank you, all of you, for filling out applications, because it gives us some additional information there, which is really helpful.
And I have a little follow-up too. Just I've done grant writing for a lot of years to various groups and managed a few grants. I'm sure many people on the call have. Without being too specific, like embarrassing anybody, can you say whether there were any past grants under this that have failed to do what they wanted to do or not been successful, and what were the mistakes versus which of the grants really lived up to what they said they would do and what you wanted? I'd like to know what mistakes have been made, because I don't think that gets any attention or publicity.
Well, I think that goes back to the root of our relationship with nonprofits. And this is something I feel pretty strongly about, that, you know, we're here to be your partner and we're here to learn with you. And I don't want anyone to be afraid of applying to us or afraid of proposing a project because you don't know what might happen yet. You know, we know that projects are new, that projects, you know, might not go exactly as you expect. So if that happens, I don't want anyone to think that that's a failure. I know that, like, a lot of times with philanthropy, we can be risk capital in a place that you don't have money to take those risks without support. You know, so same thing, if you're starting a volunteer program and you're not sure how it's going to go, and you might not be able to dedicate $10,000 to it, but you could come to us and we could help. And then you could learn from that and grow from that. That's fabulous. And if it doesn't work out, the main thing that we want to know is that you tried and that you were trying, and then we want to learn with you as to why it didn't work out, because then we can help other nonprofits not pursue those same paths if we know that they don't work. So I don't have specific examples of things that I would say failed, mostly because I think that as long as we continue to have that type of partner relationship where you can communicate that to us and we can say, you know, maybe this funding didn't all go out in 1 year, even though we were hoping it would, and maybe we need to work on an extension or a product or like a program adaptation. That's okay. And we're on board to do that with you. I think the main thing we would ask for is just communication with us so that we can have those conversations and we can make those adjustments.
Yeah, I would comment that one of our biggest challenges, especially this last year, has been in negotiating discounted rates from the veterinarians. We have fewer and fewer who are interested in doing discounted rescue work. If you'll full pay, oh, they're very happy, but it's still hard to get appointments. And then when we go around and say, well, this is for an animal that doesn't have a clear owner, or this is for a poor family, some of the vets are getting really kind of hard edged about it and just saying, no, we're not helping that. You know, I've had one vet tell me that poor people should not own animals, which I was like, duh, you know, this is not real. It's just, I'm grateful for the grants, but I'm telling you, the vet community, it would be nice to have some other lever to get the veterinary community more enthusiastic about doing rescue work. I don't know if anybody else has that experience, but we find it.
Yeah, I think that that's definitely an ongoing conversation. You know, it's challenging to negotiate that type of bargain. And absolutely, I mean, if we can do anything to help, if we can step in any way, I mean, that's something we can absolutely talk about. I mean, same thing, we can help coordinate groups to work towards that. Our funding, unfortunately, has to come through you all. We can't go directly to the vets, but we can help you all accomplish that however we can.
Yeah, we have had some success. Every year when we've gotten the grant, we send a letter to at least 10 different vets that we don't work with. And we say, we've got a grant, community foundations involved, blah, blah, blah. And then, will you help us? And usually if we send 10 letters out, we get 1 or 2 that call us and say, oh yes, you know, I would like to help, but it would be nice. Like, I've been doing this cat rescue stuff for a long time in this county. Years ago, we would get 25 vets that wanted to help if we put out a call. Now, you know, it's just a handful. And I know everyone is feeling financially in difficult position, keeping the doors open with what they've been through the last 2 years. So I do have some empathy for them.
Absolutely. It's hard across the board. This has been a challenging couple of years, and it's hard to see and it's hard to navigate. But I mean, I'm hopeful that our community is trying to come together. But I agree. Anything that you can think of, I mean, by all means, we're here to support and we're here to help.
Angelica, Ed Sikora again, any other scopes that your donors or your endowed funds are looking to support that we haven't discussed today? I know we've got things like reserves, and I know capital projects is a big one to increase capacity, that kind of thing, right?
So capital projects are a little bit harder, and I would probably steer clear of those in this grant cycle. Primarily because we once again have that 1-year turnaround. So capital projects are a little bit harder. You know, we want projects that can be accomplished within a year. So coming in with like a big campaign is harder for us to support through this cycle. Also because our funds are pretty specific in here as to what they want to be doing. And so capital is, or like especially like large building projects are challenging to navigate in this space, because we would need to be proving that those building projects are then providing this care to the animals within a 1-year time frame, which can get a little bit tricky. But outside of what we've shared, I think that that's most of them. It's mostly, you know, we're looking for that kind of emergency medical care if you need volunteer support. But same thing, we have some smaller funds that are more general. So if you have a more general project, by all means, feel free to propose it. Once again, those are not restrictions as to what you can apply for. They're just suggestions, because that's where we have more flexibility with funds.
Okay, right. So it's really more all about the emergency, you know, medical care and the increased, I guess the increased volunteer, you know, groups to help overall manage all of these organizations.
Yeah, a lot of our funds are concentrated on kind of that direct care for animals. So things that can show us that are better received and kind of feel like better fits for our funds.
Terrific. Thank you.
And I see there's a question in the chat too. Are there any new questions on the application from previous years? It looks pretty similar. There's a couple just that are reworded or, you know, readjusted, but it's not a dramatic overhaul from previous years. There is one section on the application this year that's new and it's optional. So don't feel the pressure to fill it out if you don't want to. But it's a section that asks kind of very specific questions about your project in relationship to funds that we have. So I mentioned, you know, some of our funds might be restricted by county. So in this optional question section, there are questions about, you know, are you in this county? So that we can then decide which funds might be a good fit. We're not using that section to rule you out by any means. It just means that if we didn't know this about your organization or we didn't stand out to us, we might be able to see it and match it to a different fund that we weren't aware of. So when you look through that section, you're welcome to fill it out. You're also welcome to skip it. But what it does for us is just helps us consider you for more funds if we can. So that's a new section. But other than that, it looks pretty similar.
Hi, people. Angelica? This is Greg Parrott, Sarasota Parrot. Is it appropriate if we have something that we feel falls outside of this, but still is directly involved with animal care, to shoot you an email to find out whether that's, I mean, with limited funds, you'd hate to send something in and give it one shot that there was nothing there available. Is that appropriate?
It's appropriate. I would say it's almost as appropriate. I would say it's almost more appropriate to just do an application and we can go from there. Just because the applications, I mean, it's not intended to be super long. Like this year, we have also added length limits, or not length limits, but like guidelines. We say like, we'd really love 2 sentences here, or 3 sentences, so that, we're not looking for pages of information. But I think that submitting it in the application form is helpful because sometimes, we want to be able to look at all the projects that come in as considerations for the different funds that we have available. So while I might say, yes, we have a fund that could do that project, we might get 20 applications that only qualify for that one fund. And then that could get a little bit tricky because that makes that fund a lot more competitive. So it's almost better to just submit the application yourself.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, if that's it, I'll have one follow-up. Do you ever give feedback after the grant if you don't receive one?
Absolutely. So one of the things that we'll send out if you don't receive a grant is you'll get an email from me that says, hey, sorry, you didn't receive funding in this round. And then it will also have an offer for a phone call. If you take me up on that, what I will do is I'll walk you through once again what our committee process looks like. And then I will pull up your application and I will pull up our committee's comments and I will walk you through kind of questions that they had, comments that they had, not with names, not like anything specific. I'm not going to be like, I said this, but I will walk you through what our conversation looked like and then kind of where the weaker elements were or where the questions remained after that review. All right, do we have any more questions? All right, well, thank you all. Oh, here we go, okay. Oh, someone did have a question about the optional section. Yes, the optional section is a little bit strange because we put it across the board from all of our applications. So that one question we asked kind of they're very specific questions in that optional funding section. So they are specifically about different populations or different geographic regions. And that's because those populations or those geographic regions are called out in some of our funds. And so, when you look through that, it might seem a little bit strange for an animal welfare cycle. It's not, do you serve horses? Some of them are like, do you serve single mothers specifically? If you don't, you can just go ahead and say no. If you do, I would never have thought to ask you that question for some of these programs, but I might just not know. And so it's helpful for us to get that idea. And I would say if you want to answer yes to any of those questions, I would say yes, only if you can provide numbers or an estimation of like a percentage that would be served. So the follow-up question on all of those is if you say, yes, our project specifically serves people who are blind or have low vision. The next question that's going to pop up is, okay, what percentage of the population served are going to have this, are going to be blind or have low vision? And that is so that, same thing, if we're looking at your project holistically, we might not be able to fund 100% of it from a fund for people who are blind. But if you specifically serve 5% of your population falls inside of those guidelines, we might be able to fund 5% of your project through that fund. So I would say yes if you have the numbers to help us make that choice. If you don't have the numbers to make that choice, you can go ahead and say no. Yes, and I would definitely agree. I can see in the chat again, the key is kind of, we're looking at any of those funds that are called out in that optional section. We're looking for specific numbers there that are about those specific populations. So even though you might touch some of these populations, if you're not really serving them specifically, it's hard for us to justify using a fund that's written for those populations to serve a project. So yeah, I think absolutely. It's if you have those details and if this is a population well, go ahead and include it. If not, go ahead and say no. All right, any other questions? All right, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to conclude our information session. If you have any questions at all, feel free to shoot me an email. Email's easiest for me. I can get back to everybody a little bit easier that way and kind of give you your answer in writing. But if you want to set up a phone call, we can do that too. So feel free to reach out to me. We did record this info session. I know it pops up when you first come on board. And we will be posting it on our website.
Why don't keep it at your desk?
But the main reason that we're doing that is because I'll be heading out here shortly on maternity leave. So you can reach out to me via email, and we'll also link you up to a member of our team if you have questions along the way. But I'll be out for a little while, so feel free to reach out to me. My inbox is a great place where we'll be able to kind of divide and conquer amongst our team. But we recorded this info session too, so we can share it with anybody else who has questions during that time period while I'm out. And so from there, thank you all so much for your time today. Thanks for being here. Thanks for communicating with us, and thanks for being a part of this. And I look forward to seeing your applications after the holidays. Have a great rest of your afternoon.